Hello everyone and welcome back to Deciphering Weather. In today's video, we're going to go over the risks that hurricanes pose during our National Hurricane Preparedness Week. If you'd like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all of my upcoming videos. So hurricanes are some of the most destructive storms that planet Earth can unleash upon us. They're basically huge heat engines that draw up energy from the ocean and distribute it to the upper levels of the higher latitudes of the planet. And it's part of the Earth's heat distribution system, taking heat from the tropics and bringing it up toward the poles. And unfortunately, humans just get in the way. And as you can see with this graph here, since the 1970s, the percentage of people living closer to the coast where hurricanes make landfall from the Gulf Coast up the east coast of the United States has only increased and is higher than 36% now. And the counties on the A graph here that show how many people can be affected from a hurricane, from either wind, flooding, tornadoes, any of the risks that we're going to be discussing in this video. So what are some of those risks that we can see from a hurricane? And as I mentioned, the first one and the most obvious one and most talked about is the wind. Whenever we hear about a hurricane, we're talking about, is it a Category 1? Is it a Category 2? Is it a major Category 5 like Ian was and was upgraded during post-analysis this past spring? That is the most talked about aspect of a hurricane, is how fast are the winds. And for good measure, it's because hurricanes only are classified a hurricane once they've reached 74 miles an hour in sustained winds. Major hurricanes when they've reached 111, and a Category 5, which is rare, when we've reached 157 plus miles an hour in sustained winds. But then there's a gust and other factors that come into play too. And the way the hurricane works, like I said, it's a huge heat engine. It draws up the energy from the ocean into a warm core that gets surrounded by thunderstorms that creates what's called an eye wall. And then those outer bands cause those outflow channels and causes that perpetual cycle of warm air in the center with outflowing air that cools off as it moves to the outer edges. Now, most people see a hurricane is when they're watching their local news channel and they see this image. It's a radar loop of what a hurricane looks like as it's approaching land. And this is actually from Hurricane Ian back in September of 2022 as it made landfall near Cape Coral in Florida. And you can see the eye wall, which is that surrounded around the eye, around the hurricane. That's the strongest winds in those thunderstorms there. And then you see those outer bands as well. And it's when this eye wall comes on shore that we have the next risk that we discussed besides wind, but is also the storm surge. And it can be very devastating storm surge, especially in very low-lying areas along the Gulf Coast and on the Barrier Islands, like in North Carolina. And that's because the ocean actually increases in level. So the eye wall is like a vacuum and it's pulling on the ocean because of the low pressure. It's causing the ocean level to rise above where it normally would be. And then it's basically bringing the ocean onto the land when it makes landfall. And then on top of that, you have the large waves, which is causing some of that destruction to break up the homes and the barriers and causes that debris to then spread out and become even more destructive as the ocean continues moving inland. And like I said, this is a big problem across a lot of portions of the east coast of the United States, especially in the Carolinas, in and around Long Island, the Florida Keys, and then especially in Louisiana, where we have a lot of those marshes and very low-lying lands. And you can see that here on our maps here, with the frequency of seeing these hurricanes come through, even just tropical storms, and the inundation that these can cause. but also the height that these waters can rise. And each storm is different. Obviously, a Category 5 will have much higher storm surges than, it's say, a Category 1. But then sometimes you get storms like Katrina back in 2005, which was only a Category 3, but it made landfall. But because it was previously a Category 5 in the middle of the open waters of the Gulf, it carried that energy even though it weakened with it towards Louisiana. So that's why when we say to evacuate, especially in the low-lying coastal areas, just evacuate. It's much safer, and you don't have to worry about risking your life. Now going back to this radar loop again of Hurricane Ian, and you can see those outer bands as they come on shore. They have what's called spin associated with them, and those thunderstorms could be rotating, and when they rotate and come across land, sometimes they can produce tornadoes or water spouts, and those water spouts then come on land and become classified or tornado. And that's because of the change in height of the change in direction of wind with height as these storms come on shore. So you have these storms that are causing some spin, and then the air gets lifted, and then that causes the tornado to form from these outer bands as this hurricane comes on shore. And you can see that damage anywhere near the coast, from the Gulf Coast across Florida, the East Coast, all the way up to New England as well. And the frequency of these usually max out at an F3, an EF3, but usually an F0, EF1 is what we're dealing with hurricanes on a typical basis. And then just going back to that radar loop one more time, but all these thunderstorms, when they come across the land and making landfall, they can be what's called training over one another, over as the same area over and over and over again, and that can cause inland flooding. And that's one of the biggest killers of all hurricanes, besides storm surge, is inland flooding, because it could be deceiving on how deep the water is. You could be driving, think it's just a puddle, and the next thing you know, your car is being lifted away because it's now buoyant in all this water from heavy rain. And it doesn't go anywhere because it just pools, and it's still raining and raining and raining. And that's kind of like what happened in Houston with Harvey. You just had so much rain that you had flooding everywhere for days after that storm. Then the last risk that we have to worry about, and that's for the people who like to go to the beach, even if it's just a tropical storm or a weak hurricane, and they're like, oh, this isn't going to be that big, it's just a minor storm, and they go to the beach and they think they're going to surf the waves, and then they get into what's called a rip current. And basically, because of the way the wind is coming on shore, it causes a current to pull people out to sea, and you need to swim parallel to the coast in order to escape that current. But some people forget that, and they get pulled out and unfortunately sometimes drown because the beaches are not being protected by lifeguards most of the time during hurricanes for their own safety. So in terms of hurricane preparedness, again, you want to know the risk that you're in. If you want to know if you're in a threat for a storm surge, inland flooding from heavy rain, the strong winds from a hurricane, or tornadoes, or even rip currents if you live near the beach. And you want to know if you're in a flood-prone area for inland flooding, or if you're in a storm surge area, you're going to want to evacuate, especially if you're in a structure that's not a stable home like a mobile home. And that's going to be one of our next videos, is what to do in preparation when you're going to have to evacuate for one of these hurricanes. As a reminder, we have super thanks available on Deciphering Weather. So if you'd like to donate to the channel, please go down to the heart button where it says thanks. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button and leave a comment. Please share this video with your family and friends on social media. And if you're new and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all of my upcoming videos. Thank you, and have a great day.